My name is Helen, I'm 68, and I did something I never ever thought a mother would have to do. I put my own son's family home up for sale. The very house I bought for them with my late husband's entire life savings. Before I tell you about the chilling phone call from my lawyer that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The polished mahogany of Mr. Davis's desk felt cold under my trembling hands. I slid the folder with the house deed across its surface. The sound it made was quiet, but in the silence of that stuffy office it felt like a gunshot. I want to sell the house in Georgetown, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Mr. Davis, our family lawyer for 30 years, pushed his glasses up his nose. He'd handled my husband Robert's will, the funeral arrangements, everything. He looked at me with a deep, concerned frown. Mark's house? Helen, what on earth has happened? A bitter laugh almost escaped my lips. Mark's house. That was the problem right there. Everyone thought of it as Mark's house. But it was mine. Bought and paid for with the blood, sweat, and tears of a 40-year marriage, all wrapped up in a final check from an insurance company after Robert's heart gave out. It's in his name, I know, I said, meeting his gaze. But it's my house. And I'm taking it back. I took a deep breath, the air conditioning rattling overhead. To understand, you have to go back to last Sunday. A day I foolishly thought would be like any other. I should have seen the storm coming. The signs had been there for months, small shifts in the atmosphere, a certain chill when I'd call. But I was a mother. A grandmother. You ignore the signs because you're blinded by a love you think is unconditional. Then last Sunday that storm finally broke, and it washed away everything I thought I knew about my own family. It started, as it often did, in my kitchen, the warm, sunny heart of my Austin home. My grandson, 8-year-old Leo, had just spilled bright purple grape juice down the front of his clean shirt. I was dabbing at it with a damp cloth, chuckling, while little 5-year-old Mia sat on the floor, lining up her dolls. It was perfect. A perfect, normal Sunday. Then Jessica, my daughter-in-law, walked in from the living room. She had a look on her face I'd come to recognize and dread. It was the look of a gathering storm, tight-lipped and flashing with lightning. Helen, we need to talk. Her voice cut through the happy chatter like a knife. Mia stopped playing. Leo froze. I just looked at her, my hand still resting on Leo's small shoulder. Of course, honey. Is everything all right? She let out a short, sharp laugh that had no humor in it. No, Helen. Nothing is all right. She crossed her arms, a general preparing for battle. We're tired. We're tired of you controlling our lives with your money. The words hit me like a physical blow. Control? I was just helping. Since Mark's hours at the firm had been cut back, I'd been quietly covering the tuition for Leo's private school, picking up new shoes for Mia when I saw she needed them, making sure their fridge was always full. How was that control? How was that anything but love? I don't understand, I stammered. I'm just trying to help you. That's the problem, she snapped, her voice rising. You're always helping. You pay for something and suddenly you think you have a say in everything. A say in how we raise our kids, a say in what car we drive, a say in what groceries we buy. We can't breathe, Helen. My eyes darted to the doorway, searching, pleading. My son Mark was standing there, leaning against the frame. He'd been there the whole time. He had heard every word. I waited for him to step in, to defend me, to tell his wife she was being unfair. But he just stood there. His eyes were fixed on the floor tiles as if they held the secrets to the universe. He was a statue carved from cowardly silence. Jessica saw me looking at him, and a cruel, triumphant smirk played on her lips. She knew she had him. She turned back to me for the final devastating blow. We're adults, Helen. We don't need you. In fact, we don't want anything from you anymore. Not your money. Not your opinions. Nothing. Do you understand? The air was sucked out of my lungs. The bright, sunny kitchen suddenly felt like a cold, dark tomb. But it wasn't her words that shattered me. It was the silence that followed. A heavy, suffocating silence from the one person in the world who should have broken it. I turned my head slowly, away from Jessica's venomous glare, and looked straight at my son. My only child. The boy I had raised to be a good man. His face was pale, his jaw tight, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. I held his gaze, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, each beat a silent plea. Say something. Defend me. Be my son. Mark. My voice was a whisper, a fragile thread in the heavy silence. Aren't you going to say something? He finally flinched, his eyes flickering from the floor to my face, then quickly away again as if my gaze physically burned him. He licked his lips, a nervous habit he's had since he was a boy trying to explain a broken vase. Mom, he started, his voice low and strained, a traitor's mumble. Look, let's not make a scene. Jessica she's just stressed. He glanced at his wife, a quick, appeasing look. Maybe she has a point. You can be a little insistent. Insistent. The word landed not like a stone, but like a shard of glass in my gut. It was a calculated word, a corporate sterile word used to dismiss a person's passion, their love, their very essence. It wasn't loving. It wasn't generous. It wasn't even overprotective. It was insistent. A word designed to diminish me, to reduce my decades of sacrifice to a minor annoyance, like a fly buzzing at a picnic. And it came from my own son. He had taken the poison his wife had offered and willingly drank it down. That was it. That was the moment my heart, which had already been cracked by Jessica's cruelty, finally shattered into a million irreparable pieces. A cold, numbing wave washed over me, a strange and terrible calm. It was the calm of a battlefield after the battle is lost, the silence of utter devastation. I looked at Jessica, whose face was alight with the smug, ugly glow of victory. She had done it. She had successfully driven a wedge not just between me and my son, but between my son and his own conscience. I looked at Mark, this stranger wearing my son's face, a man whose spine had apparently dissolved, and my gaze fell on my sweet grandchildren Leo and Mia, their small faces pale with confusion, their big eyes darting between the adults, sensing that the world as they knew it had just tilted off its axis. I had been in the middle of dabbing the grape juice from Leo's shirt. Slowly, deliberately, as if my movements were being controlled by someone else, I took the damp cloth and folded it into a neat square, placing it on the granite countertop. The same countertop I had picked out with Jessica, the one she had said was her absolute dream. I straightened my back, feeling the full weight of my 68 years, and for the first time in a long time I didn't feel like a mother or a grandmother. I felt like a soldier in enemy territory. I walked toward the doorway where Mark was still standing, a useless sentinel guarding nothing. He had the decency to shrink back slightly as I approached, finally unable to meet my eyes. I didn't say a word to him. I didn't have to. The contempt I felt was a physical force, a cold aura that radiated from me. I walked past him so close our arms brushed and I felt nothing. No spark of connection. Nothing but a cold, empty void. I picked up my purse from the hall table, my movements fluid and unhurried. I turned back to face the room. Well, I said, my voice eerily even, devoid of any emotion. If you don't want anything from me, then I suppose that settles it. Jessica's smile widened into a triumphant grin. She had won. She had engineered my exile, and my own son had held the door open for her. Mark just stood there shuffling his feet, the picture of pathetic discomfort. But he said nothing more. Not a single word to stop me, to ask me to stay, to offer even the smallest olive branch. His silence was his signature on the treaty of my surrender. I'm going out for a while, I announced to the room at large, my voice carrying a chilling finality. Watch the children. The screen door slammed shut behind me. It wasn't a sound of anger. It was the sound of an ending. A period at the end of a long and ultimately tragic chapter of my life. I got into my car, my hands shaking so badly that I fumbled with the key, the metal scraping against the ignition. I finally got the engine to turn over and pulled away from the curb, not looking back. I couldn't bear to see the house, my house, with them still inside it. The tears came then, hot and blinding, a torrent of grief and rage I had refused to show them. I drove aimlessly through the familiar suburban streets, the neat lawns and tidy houses a blur. Each of Jessica's words was a fresh stab, controlling, burden. We're tired of you. But it was Mark's word, his single cowardly word, insistent, that twisted the knife over and over again. Was that what I was? A lifetime of scraped knees kissed better, of fevers soothed through the night, of lunches packed and homework checked, of college tuition paid and first apartment furniture bought. Had all of it, every single act of love, simply been a long, tiresome insistence? The passenger seat beside me felt cavernously empty. It was Robert's seat. He should have been there, his warm, steady hand on my arm. He would have known what to say. He never would have stood for this. He would have looked our son in the eye and, in his quiet, firm way, reminded him what loyalty and family truly meant. "You don't let anyone talk to your mother that way," he would have said. "I don't care who it is." But Robert was gone. And in his absence, our son had forgotten how to be a man. He had let his wife commit matricide of the soul, right there in my own kitchen, and he had served as her silent accomplice. The fury came then, a clean white-hot rage that burned through the fog of my grief. They wanted nothing from me? Fine. A request had been made. But they were living in a fool's paradise if they thought their comfortable, beautiful life was their own creation. Their life was a gift bought with my love, my security, and my husband's legacy. And I was beginning to realize a gift, once rejected, can be taken back. I drove until the familiar streets melted into a blur. My mind a chaotic storm of betrayal and sorrow. Eventually, instinct took over, and I found myself pulling up to the curb of a quiet, tree-lined street I knew by heart. My sister Carol's street. I cut the engine and just sat there, the silence of the car pressing in on me. The tidy brick house with its cheerful blue door seemed like a port in a hurricane. For a long time I couldn't move. Getting out of the car meant making it real. It meant saying the words out loud. Finally, I found the strength to walk up the path, each step feeling like I was wading through wet cement. Before my knuckles could even touch the door, it swung open. Carol stood there, a half-peeled potato in one hand and a peeler in the other, a worried frown creasing her brow. She took one look at my face, the puffy eyes, the tear tracks, the utter desolation, and her expression shifted from concern to alarm. "Helen? Oh my God, what is it?" She dropped the potato and peeler on her porch table, pulling me inside with a firm hand on my arm. She didn't bombard me with questions. She just guided me to her plush sofa, wrapped a soft, hand-knitted afghan around my shoulders, and went to the kitchen to make tea. When she returned, she placed the warm, steaming mug into my trembling hands. Only then, when I was cocooned in warmth and sisterly care, did she ask again, her voice gentle. "Talk to me. Tell me what happened." And so I did. The story came pouring out of me, a torrent of ugly, humiliating details. Jessica's cold, planned ambush. Her venomous accusations of control. The way she had used my love as a weapon against me. And the worst part, the part that made my voice break and the tears start anew. Mark's utter and complete betrayal. His cowardly silence. His one soul-crushing word. Insistent. When I finished, the only sound in the room was my own ragged breathing. Carol was silent, her lips pressed into a thin white line of fury. She slowly picked up her own teacup, her knuckles white. "They said what?" she finally whispered, her voice shaking with a rage that was all the more terrifying for its quiet intensity. "After everything? After the inheritance? After that house? That house?" The words hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken sacrifice. It wasn't just a structure of wood and drywall. It was my final act of love for my husband. It was the legacy I had passed on to my son. It was my entire future signed away on a piece of paper. My mind reeled back 4 years, to the raw, empty days after Robert's funeral. The silence in our home was a physical presence, a constant reminder of my loss. I was adrift in a sea of grief, just going through the motions, when Mr. Davis, our lawyer, called me into his office to settle Robert's estate. There was the pension, and there was the life insurance policy, the one we diligently paid into every month for 40 years, a safety net for whichever one of us was left behind. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough for me to live out my days in comfort and security, to never be a burden on my son. That was always our plan. But then I visited Mark and Jessica. They were renting a cramped, third-floor apartment in a dingy complex that smelled of stale cigarettes and boiled cabbage. The carpets were stained, the fixtures were rusted, and my grandchildren had nowhere to play but a miserable patch of grass next to the overflowing dumpsters. It broke my heart. This wasn't the life Robert and I had worked so hard to provide for our family. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about that insurance check sitting in my bank account. What was the point of my own security if my son's family was living like that? Robert's voice was clear in my head. "You take care of family, Helen. That's all that matters. The next morning, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I called a realtor. I didn't want Mark and Jessica to be shackled to a 30-year mortgage. I wanted to give them a foundation, a real head start. I spent weeks searching for the perfect place, my heart filled with a new purpose. And then I found it. A magnificent 4-bedroom house in a new gated community in Georgetown. It had glossy hardwood floors, a kitchen with a huge island, and a big beautiful backyard with a mature oak tree perfect for a swing. The local schools were among the best in Texas. It was a dream home. It was safety. It was security. It was everything I wanted for them. The price tag was staggering. It would take every last dollar of the insurance money, plus a huge chunk of Robert's pension. It was my entire nest egg. Mr. Davis sat me down in his office, the same one I'd be sitting in again so soon, and laid out the risks. Helen, think about this, he'd urged. What about your future? What about unforeseen medical expenses, or the need for assisted living down the road? This leaves you with very little cushion. I remember looking at a photo of Leo and me on my phone. My cushion is knowing they are safe and happy, I told him. What good is a nest if I'm the only one in it? I insisted on putting the house in Mark's name. I wanted him to feel that pride, that sense of accomplishment. I pictured him standing on the porch, king of his castle. When I gave him the keys, he'd cried. He'd hugged me so tight I could barely breathe and whispered, "Thank you, Mom. I don't know what to say. You've given us a future." Jessica had kissed my cheek, gushing about paint colors and garden plans. They had been so grateful then. Or so I thought. Now, sitting on my sister's sofa, the memory was laced with poison. That gift, given so freely, now felt like an anchor dragging me down. I had traded my financial security, the last tangible piece of my life with Robert, for their happiness. And in return, they had stood in the kitchen I paid for, surrounded by the appliances I bought, and told me they wanted nothing from me. They had taken my ultimate sacrifice and thrown it back in my face like a piece of trash. Carol's teacup rattled in its saucer as she slammed it down on the coffee table. The sound jolted me from my painful reverie. Her face was flushed with a protective fury that was almost frightening to behold. "Unbelievable," she seethed, getting to her feet and beginning to pace back and forth on her oriental rug, her steps agitated and sharp. "Just unbelievable. After everything you did, after liquidating your entire future for them, that little witch has the audacity to call you controlling." She stopped and pointed a finger at me. "I never trusted her, you know. Never. Not from day one." "Carol, don't." I started, the old habit of defending my son's choices dying hard. "No, I'm going to say it." She cut me off, her eyes flashing. "Remember that first Thanksgiving she came to? She made that passive-aggressive comment about your stuffing being so traditional. And remember the Christmas you knitted that beautiful, intricate sweater for Mark, and she said, 'Oh, how homemade.' It was always there, Helen. That little drip of poison, that subtle condescension. She's always seen you as a rival, not a mother-in-law. I saw it, but you were too blinded by your love for Mark to notice." Her words were harsh, but they were also true. I saw a montage of small slights, of backhanded compliments and subtle dismissals I had brushed aside for years, always giving Jessica the benefit of the doubt for Mark's sake. "And Mark," Carol continued, her voice dripping with disappointment. "Oh, Helen, what happened to him? He used to be such a good boy, so considerate. He's let that woman hollow him out and build a nest for herself inside. He's a coward. There's no other word for it. He's so terrified of a little marital discord that he's willing to watch his own mother be crucified. It's disgusting." Her anger was a strange and powerful tonic. It cut through my grief and validated my pain in a way nothing else could. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't being overly sensitive. What they had done was monstrous, and my sister's righteous fury affirmed it. "I don't know what to do," I whispered, the words sounding weak and pathetic even to my own ears. Carol stopped pacing and came to sit beside me on the sofa. She took my hands in hers. Her hands were warm and strong. "Yes, you do," she said, her voice softening but losing none of its intensity. "You are not the weak one here, Helen. You are the strongest woman I know. You survived losing Robert. You can survive this. The question is not what to do. The question is, are you going to let them get away with it?" The question hung in the air, a direct challenge. Let them get away with it? Let them live in that beautiful house, bought with my husband's legacy, while treating me like an inconvenient nuisance? Let Jessica win? No. The grief inside me, which had been a wild, raging sea, began to calm. And as the waters receded, something else was revealed on the shore. Something hard and unyielding. It was my own spine. They said they want nothing from me, I said, my voice no longer a whisper. It was low and steady. Fine. They will get exactly what they asked for. Nothing. Carol raised an eyebrow, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. What are you thinking? The house, Carol, I said, my gaze locking with hers. It's in Mark's name, a legal complication, I'm sure. But it was bought with my money. Every last cent. It was a gift, given under the unspoken contract of love and family. That contract has been breached. Terminated. Helen, are you sure? She asked, though her eyes were gleaming with approval. There's no going back from a move like that. Going back to what? I asked, a bitter laugh escaping me. To being tolerated? To being the family bank account with opinions no one wants to hear? To being insistent? No, thank you. That life is over. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a feeling of power I hadn't felt since Robert died. They want to be adults? Wonderful. Let's see how adult they can be when they have a mortgage payment, property taxes, and a homeowners association fee to deal with. Let's see how independent they feel then. You know, it's funny. For years, I had defined myself by my role as a wife and a mother. My purpose was to give, to support, to nurture. But in that moment, I realized a new purpose was being forged in the fires of this betrayal. Self-preservation. And self-respect. I reached for my purse, my movements no longer shaky but filled with a new, cold purpose. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the contacts. My thumb hovered over the name I was looking for. Davis, Jonathan, lawyer. Carol watched me, her smile widening. Give him hell, Helen, she whispered. I'm not giving them hell, I replied, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. I'm just giving them exactly what they asked for. My finger pressed down on the screen. The phone began to ring, the sound echoing in the quiet living room. It was the sound of a sleeping giant waking up. They had started this war, smug in their belief that I was too old, too soft, too much of a mother to ever fight back. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The following evening I set the stage. I made a pot of coffee, its bitter aroma filling the kitchen. I sat at my dining room table, not in my usual comfortable armchair. I wanted a hard, unforgiving surface between us. I placed the thick folder Mr. Davis had prepared for me squarely in the center of the table. Then I called Mark. My voice was clipped, a tone he hadn't heard from me since he was a teenager who had broken curfew. I need you to come over. Now. We have something important to discuss. Mom, look, if this is about Sunday, he started, his voice already laced with that weary, placating tone that set my teeth on edge. I really don't think we should. This is not a discussion, Mark. I cut him off sharply. It is a requirement. Be here in 1 hour. I hung up before he could muster another weak protest. He arrived 58 minutes later, looking like a schoolboy summoned to the principal's office for a crime he knew he'd committed. He walked in hesitantly, avoiding my eyes, his shoulders slumped. He made a move toward the living room sofa, his usual spot, but I stopped him. In here, I said, gesturing to the chair opposite me at the dining table. The formal setting immediately put him on edge. He sat down awkwardly, his hands fidgeting in his lap. I didn't offer him coffee. I didn't ask about the kids. I let the silence stretch, thick and uncomfortable, watching as his composure began to fray. Finally, when the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall felt deafeningly loud, I spoke. I spent the day with my lawyer. I began, my voice as cold and hard as the tabletop. I slid the folder across the polished wood. It stopped directly in front of him. Mr. Davis has drawn up the necessary documents. These are listing agreements with a real estate agent. I need your signature to put the house on the market. He stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Sell our house? He stammered. The emphasis he put on our was like a lit match to my anger. What are you talking about? he continued, his voice rising in panic. You can't be serious. Mom, that's our home. We live there. A humorless smile touched my lips. Let's be very clear, Mark. It was never your home. It has always been my house. A house I bought for you in your name with the inheritance your father left for me. I made a gift of it, under the assumption of a loving, respectful family relationship. That assumption, I said, leaning forward slightly, was proven to be false last Sunday. The terms of the gift have been violated. The gift is now rescinded. This is insane, he said, his voice cracking. This is because of what Jessica said, isn't it? She was just upset. She had a tough day. And you? I shot back, my voice dangerously quiet. Did you have a tough day too when you called me insistent? When you stood there and implicitly agreed with every cruel word that came out of her mouth. This isn't just about Jessica, Mark. This is about you. This is about your cowardice. Panic was starting to set in, real tangible panic. But the kids? What about the kids? Leo's school is one of the best in the state. Mia's friends are all on our block. Jessica. My God, Jessica is the head of the neighborhood watch. Our whole life is there. Did you think about the kids when you allowed their grandmother to be humiliated in front of them? I countered, my voice like ice. Did you think about how your son was watching you, learning from you what it means to be a man, and seeing you do nothing? You should have thought about your life on Sunday, Mark. You and Jessica made a very clear declaration. You want to be adults. You want to be independent. You want nothing from me. I am simply granting your wish. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of sheer desperation. Mom, please. Don't do this. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know you spent everything. The dam of my composure finally cracked. And what exactly did you think, Mark? My voice rose, filled with the pent-up fury of years of quiet sacrifice. Did you think a $500,000 house in a gated community was a party favor? Did you think I had some secret trust fund I'd never told you about? No. I spent every last penny of the money that was supposed to let me grow old with dignity, without fear. The money your father worked his entire life for. I gambled my security on your happiness, and you and your wife spat on it. So don't you dare sit there and pretend you're a victim in this. He visibly shrank in his chair, the full weight of his monumental error finally crashing down on him. He looked at me, truly looked at me, and I could see in his eyes that he was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had taken for granted. So here's the deal, I said, my voice returning to its icy calm. I tapped a manicured finger on the folder. Mr. Davis has explained the legalities. Since the house is in your name, your cooperation will make this a clean, simple transaction. We can have it on the market by the end of the week. If you refuse to sign, I paused, letting the threat hang in the air, I will have to pursue legal action to prove the house was purchased with my sole funds under the premise of a verbal agreement, which has now been broken. It will get messy. It will get ugly. It will involve depositions and court fees that will drain your salary for years to come. But I assure you, Mark, the outcome will be exactly the same. That house will be sold. The only question is whether you want to do this the easy way, or the excruciatingly hard way. He looked up at me, his face pale, his eyes wide with a dawning horror that was almost pitiful to see. You're kicking me out, he whispered. You're kicking your own son and your grandchildren out onto the street. No, I said, my voice precise and devoid of any emotion. I am not kicking you out. I am respecting your decision. Your wife, with your silent agreement, drew a line in the sand. She said, "We want nothing from you." I am simply stepping back to my side of that line. It is time for you to stand on your own 2 feet, Mark. This is the independence you so desperately wanted. I hope it's everything you dreamed it would be. He stared at the folder, then back at me, his expression a mixture of terror and disbelief. He left that night without signing, without another word, looking like a man who had just been told the world was no longer round. But I wasn't worried. It wasn't defiance I saw in his eyes. It was the primal fear of a man who had just realized his safety net had been set on fire, and he was 1,000 feet in the air with nowhere to land. I knew he'd be back. It was just a matter of how hard he hit the ground. I had foolishly believed the worst was over. The confrontation with Mark, as painful as it was, felt like a necessary surgery. I thought the next stage would be a quiet, sad waiting game. But I had failed to account for one thing: the boundless venom of a narcissist scorned. Jessica wasn't just going to retreat. She was going to engage in a scorched earth campaign designed to utterly destroy me. The first salvo came 2 days later, not as a cannonball, but as a quiet, poisonous dart. My sister Carol called me, her voice tight with an anger that was clearly being restrained. "Helen, I just had the most bizarre and infuriating phone call of my life," she said without preamble. "From Jessica." My blood ran cold. What did she want? "Oh, you're not going to believe this," Carol said with a bitter laugh. She was crying, hysterically. Said she didn't know who else to turn to. She spun this elaborate tale about how you've been unstable since Robert passed away, how you've become possessive and controlling. She claimed you're pathologically jealous of her happy little family, and that this whole business with the house is your vindictive attempt to break up her marriage because you can't stand to see your son happy with another woman. I sank into a kitchen chair, the phone feeling heavy and slick in my hand. The audacity of it, the sheer theatrical evil of it, was breathtaking. She was taking our reality and twisting it into a grotesque caricature, with her as the tragic heroine and me as the wicked, lonely old witch. "Carol, you know that's not." "Of course I know that," she snapped. I told her she was delusional and that I knew exactly what happened. But she was good, Helen. I'll give her that. She was a regular Meryl Streep. The quivering voice, the worried gasps about the children's stability. She's not just defending herself. She's going on the offensive. She's trying to preemptively poison the well with the entire family. And she was terrifyingly effective. The next day I got a call from my cousin Susan in Florida. A sweet but notoriously gullible woman. Her voice was laced with a syrupy, pitying concern. "Helen dear, I just spoke to that lovely Jessica. Oh, that poor girl. I am so worried about you, honey. Grief can do strange things to people. Maybe you should talk to someone." I felt a surge of rage so intense it made me dizzy. Jessica had managed to reframe my righteous anger as mental instability. But the cruelest blow, the one that was aimed with surgical precision at the most vulnerable part of my heart, came that Thursday. The phone rang and it was Leo, my sweet 8-year-old grandson. His voice was small and hesitant. "Grandma." "Hi, my sweet boy. How are you?" I tried to inject a level of cheerfulness into my voice that felt like a lie. "I'm okay," he said quietly. "Grandma, Mommy said you're trying to take my room away. She said you're going to make us live in the car because you're mad at her. Is that true, Grandma? Why are you mad at my mommy?" His voice wobbled on the last question, a sound that shattered my already fractured heart. I had to close my eyes and take a deep, shaky breath to keep from sobbing. To use a child as a pawn in her sick game, to fill his innocent mind with such terrifying images and plant seeds of disloyalty against his own grandmother. It was a level of cruelty I simply couldn't comprehend. "Oh, Leo, my love, no," I said, my voice thick with tears I was trying to hold back. "That is absolutely not true. Grown-ups sometimes have disagreements that are very complicated and hard to understand. But you listen to me. Your grandma loves you and Mia more than all the stars in the sky. Nothing and nobody will ever change that. Do you understand?" "I guess," he whispered, though he sounded unconvinced. He hung up a moment later, leaving me in a silence that was filled with the sound of my own heart breaking. She wasn't just trying to get rid of me. She was trying to erase the very memory of my love from my grandchildren's hearts. The public execution took place that weekend. My friend Martha, who I play bridge with, called me. Her voice was stiff and formal. "Helen, I'm not one to gossip," she began, which is always how gossip begins, "but I think you need to look at Jessica's Facebook page." With a sense of profound dread, I logged onto the computer, my fingers fumbling on the keyboard. And there it was, a public post accompanied by a professionally taken photo of her, Mark, and the children, all of them smiling radiantly. A perfect family portrait. The caption beneath it was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive martyrdom. It read, "Feeling so heartbroken today but counting my blessings. It's a terrible thing when family, who are supposed to be your biggest support, turn out to be your biggest bullies. Be careful of those who use money and gifts, even something as big as a house, as tools of control and weapons of inheritance. A real family's love is unconditional, not a transaction. praying for peace and for those who let bitterness and loneliness poison their hearts. It was brilliant in its wickedness. She had used the keywords: house, inheritance, control. She didn't need to use my name. Everyone knew. The comments section was a sickening torrent of sympathy and outrage on her behalf. Stay strong, Jessica. You are a wonderful mother. I can't believe someone would threaten to take a home from their own grandchildren. Disgusting. Sending you so much love. Don't let the haters bring you down. I saw that one of my own bridge partners had liked the post. The sting of that small digital betrayal was surprisingly sharp. I felt trapped, silenced. How could I possibly defend myself? If I posted the truth, I would just look like the bitter, unstable old woman she was painting me as. She had backed me into a corner, meticulously assassinating my character in front of everyone I knew. I had thought I was fighting for a house. I was wrong. I was fighting for my own name, my own sanity, and the very memory of who I was. And right then it felt like a battle I was losing. Just as I felt myself sinking into a dark pit of despair, convinced that Jessica's smear campaign had irrevocably destroyed my reputation, the phone rang. It was Monday afternoon, a little over a week after the infamous Sunday ambush. The caller ID flashed with Mark's name. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to let him twist in the wind he had helped create. But a stronger, more primal part, the mother in me, couldn't. I let it ring 4 times, a small act of defiance before I answered. Hello, I said. My voice was a flat, sterile thing, stripped of all its usual warmth. Mom. His voice was thick, choked with a desperation that was almost unrecognizable. He was crying. Not just a few sniffles but deep ragged sobs that shuddered over the line. The sound of a man who had hit rock bottom. Mom, oh God, I don't know what to do. I remained silent. I offered no comfort, no soothing words. I let him sit in the wreckage of the world he had co-signed on, forcing him to look at the destruction. We've been looking at apartments all weekend. He finally managed to get out between ragged breaths. It's a nightmare. A complete nightmare. He described their humiliating search in painful detail. Landlords who looked at his salary and barely suppressed a smirk. Dingy 2-bedroom apartments in sketchy neighborhoods that cost more than their old mortgage. The stark, brutal reality of what his income could actually afford, versus the lavish lifestyle I had been subsidizing. One landlord, Mom. He looked at my application, saw I had 2 kids, and he literally laughed in my face. He said, "Good luck with that, buddy. We can't afford anything, Mom. Not even close. We're going to be homeless." The pathetic plea was implicit in every sob. Save me. Fix this. Make it go away. Please, Mom, he begged, his voice cracking with desperation. Please don't do this. Reconsider. Don't sell the house. We have nowhere to go. Please, for the kids' sake. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. It was a harsh, ugly sound. For the kids' sake? I repeated, my voice dripping with an ice-cold fury that had been simmering for 8 days. Is that what you were thinking about, Mark, when you stood in my doorway like a coward and watched your wife verbally flay me in front of them? Did you think of the kids when you allowed her to fill their heads with poison, telling them their grandmother was going to kick them out onto the street? Don't you dare use those children as a shield now. That's not fair, he protested weakly, the last gasp of a man with no argument. I was just trying to keep the peace. Keep the peace. I shot back, my voice rising. By sacrificing your own mother on the altar of your wife's temper? By allowing her to commit character assassination on me, to our entire family? Let me tell you something, Mark, and I want you to listen very carefully, because I am only going to say this once. What happened last Sunday? The thing that is breaking my heart right now, the thing that I lie awake at night staring at the ceiling about, it isn't what Jessica said to me. He was silent on the other end, the only sound his own shaky breathing. He knew what was coming. I know she doesn't like me, I continued, the words I had rehearsed in my mind 1,000 times finally spilling out. I'm not an idiot. I've known for years. I see the way she rolls her eyes when she thinks I'm not looking. I hear the condescension in her voice when she calls my decorating quaint. Her words, as cruel and calculated as they were not a surprise. I can live with my daughter-in-law not liking me. Thousands of women do. But you, Mark, you are my son. My voice began to tremble, not with weakness, but with the sheer force of my conviction. I carried you for 9 months. I went through 16 hours of labor for you. I held you when you had nightmares. I cheered the loudest at your baseball games. I was the first person you called when you got into college. I have loved you, unconditionally and fiercely, every single second of your 40 years on this earth. The thing I cannot forgive, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The thing that feels like a physical wound in my soul is your silence. Your complicity. You stood in that doorway, you heard every vicious lie, every cruel insult she hurled at me, and you did nothing. You didn't defend me. You didn't tell her she was out of line. You didn't stand by my side. No, you did worse. You sided with her. You threw me to the wolves to save yourself from a marital spat, and then you had the audacity to twist the knife by agreeing with her. That is the betrayal I can't get over. The silence on the other end was an admission of guilt. There was no defense. There was no excuse. You say you didn't want to fight with her, I concluded, my voice utterly devoid of emotion now. So you chose to fight with me instead. A very clear choice was made, Mark. You chose your wife over your mother. And choices have consequences. You wanted to be an adult, free from your insistent mother. Well, congratulations. This is what it feels like. It's expensive. It's terrifying. And you are completely, utterly on your own. Mom, please. I'm sorry. He whispered, his voice broken and pathetic. It's too late for sorry, Mark, I said. You wanted nothing from me. Your wish is granted. I pressed the end call button on my phone. The click was one of the most definitive and heartbreaking sounds I had ever heard. And then the tears I had sworn I wouldn't shed for him anymore finally came. They weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of grief. I was mourning the loss of my son. Not his physical death, but the death of the honorable, loyal man I thought I had raised. He was gone, replaced by a stranger who had stood by and watched his mother's heart break without lifting a single finger to stop the bleeding. The month that followed was a strange, hollow existence. I went through the motions of life, gardening, bridge club, lunch with Carol, but it all felt like watching a movie of someone else's life. A heavy silence had fallen over my world, a silence once filled with calls from Mark and the laughter of my grandchildren. The for sale sign was hammered into the pristine lawn of the Georgetown house by a cheerful realtor who had no idea of the family drama it represented. Seeing it there, stark and official, sent a pang through my heart, but it was followed by a surprising wave of grim determination. This was the new reality. Then one crisp Saturday morning the doorbell rang. My heart gave a painful lurch. I opened it to find Mark standing on my porch, looking like a ghost of his former self. He was gaunt, with dark, bruised-looking circles under his eyes, and a 2-day stubble shadowed his jaw. His shirt was wrinkled and there was a small, unmistakable stain, ketchup maybe, on the collar. He wasn't alone. Leo and Mia were huddled beside him, their small faces turned up to me with a mixture of hope and anxiety. "Hi, Grandma," Mia whispered, and then she broke away from her father's hand and launched herself at my legs, clinging to me as if I were a life raft. Leo followed a second later, wrapping his arms around my waist in a hug so tight it almost knocked the wind out of me. I knelt, ignoring Mark completely, and hugged them back fiercely, burying my face in their hair. They smelled of syrup and childhood. I had missed them with a physical ache that had settled deep in my bones. Over their heads I finally looked at Mark. He looked utterly broken, a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. Can we come in?" he asked, his voice hoarse and raspy. I nodded curtly, ushering the children inside. I settled them on the sofa with the TV remote and a plate of the chocolate chip cookies I knew they loved. A small act of normalcy in a world that was anything but. Mark trailed after me into the kitchen, the very room that had become a war zone. He didn't speak, just sank onto a stool at the kitchen island and buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. I stood there, leaning against the counter and waited. I would not make this easy for him. Finally he lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed and filled with a despair so profound it was almost shocking. "She's gone, Mom," he said, his voice muffled and thick. "Jessica left. She packed her bags and left on Wednesday." He recounted the story in a flat, deadened voice. The pressure had become unbearable. The constant calls from the real estate agent, the looming deadline to vacate the house, the shame of their impending financial collapse. It had all culminated in one final explosive fight. I told her we had to face facts, he said, staring at his hands on my counter. I had a list of apartments we could actually afford, places in neighborhoods I never thought I'd have to consider. I tried to show her a budget I'd worked out, and she snapped. He took a shaky breath, the memory clearly painful. She started screaming at me. She said she hadn't signed up for this, that she had married a successful lawyer, not some pathetic failure who couldn't even keep a roof over his family's head. And then she said it. She called me a useless, spineless mama's boy, and a pathetic freeloader, who was nothing without his mommy's checkbook. He paused, a single tear tracing a path through the stubble on his cheek. He didn't bother to wipe it away. She told me she could do better, that she wasn't going to go down with a sinking ship. She packed 2 suitcases, called her sister to pick her up, and just walked out. Didn't even say a proper goodbye to the kids. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading for something. Absolution? Pity? I didn't know. And the worst part, Mom, he whispered, his voice cracking. The absolute worst part is that I stood there listening to her venom, and I realized she was right about one thing. I held my breath, my own heart aching in spite of my anger. I am a freeloader, he whispered, the words filled with a self-loathing that was painful to witness. I have been my whole life, but not on her. I've been a freeloader on you. The dam finally broke. He put his head down on the cool granite of my kitchen island and sobbed like he was 8 years old again. The kind of deep, gut-wrenching sobs that come from a place of absolute brokenness. Every time I was in trouble, he choked out between sobs. You were there. The tuition for college when my scholarship fell short. The down payment on my first car. The medical bills when Mia was born with that complication. The house, Mom. The inheritance from Dad that I just took for granted as if it were my birthright. You were always my safety net. Always. And I let her do that to you. In this very room. I stood there and I let her gut you with her words. He lifted his head, his face a mess of tears and regret. I am so sorry, Mom. I am so sorry. I failed you. I failed Dad's memory. I didn't protect you. Please forgive me. Leo and Mia had crept to the doorway, drawn by the sound of their father's distress. Their cookie-crumbed faces were filled with alarm. Leo, my brave little man, walked over and wrapped his small arms around Mark's waist. It's okay, Daddy, he said softly. Don't be sad. And that's when my own tears, the ones I had fought so hard to contain, finally fell. But they weren't tears of joy or relief, not yet. They were tears of profound, agonizing pain. Because an apology, no matter how sincere, couldn't instantly mend a shattered trust. It couldn't unsay the words or undo the betrayal. We were standing in the smoldering ruins of what our family used to be, and I had no idea if anything could ever be rebuilt from the ashes. A few days after Mark's raw and painful confession in my kitchen, a fragile truce had settled. He was staying in the guest room trying to pull himself together, while I focused on providing a stable, loving environment for the grandchildren. The house was once again filled with the sounds of cartoons and little feet, but an undercurrent of tension and sadness remained. One afternoon while the kids were napping, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, and I almost ignored it, assuming it was another realtor. But something made me answer. Hello. Is this Helen? A woman's voice asked. She sounded nervous, hesitant. Yes, it is. Who is this? You don't know me, she said, a rush of air in her voice. My name is Brenda. I used to be a friend of Jessica's. I was in her book club. The name rang a faint bell. I recalled seeing her in some of Jessica's boastful Facebook photos, always smiling at the edge of the group. My guard went up immediately. Okay, I said coolly. What can I do for you, Brenda? There was a long pause and I could hear her take a deep breath. Look, I know this is out of the blue, and I probably shouldn't be calling. Jessica would absolutely kill me if she knew. But we had a falling out. And I've been feeling so incredibly guilty. I haven't been able to sleep. What she did to you, it was wrong. It was more than wrong. And I think you deserve to know the whole truth. I sank into a nearby armchair, my knees suddenly feeling weak. The truth about what? About that Sunday, Brenda said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The fight in your kitchen. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment argument, Helen. It wasn't because she was having a tough day or was stressed out. It was a performance. It was a calculated, premeditated attack. She had been planning it for weeks. My mind struggled to wrap itself around the words. The scene had been so chaotic, so emotional. The idea that it had been scripted seemed impossible. Planned? What do you mean planned? Why? She was always complaining about you, Brenda explained, the words tumbling out now in a rush of cathartic confession. It was like an obsession. She was insanely jealous of your relationship with Mark. She hated that he still called you every day. But most of all, she hated the financial dependence. Not because she disliked the lifestyle it provided, but because it meant you always had a certain power, a certain place in the family that she couldn't usurp. She felt it diminished her role as his wife. I listened, stunned into silence, as Brenda laid out the entire, chilling plot. Her plan was to orchestrate a massive public blow-up, Brenda continued. She told me about it over wine one night. She was actually proud of it. She wanted to say things that were so vicious, so unforgivable, that you would have no choice but to get angry and create distance. She wanted to provoke you into being the one to sever ties. But that's insane, I whispered. Why would she want that? Because she wanted Mark all to herself, Brenda said, her voice sharp with disgust. She had this twisted theory. She believed that if she could successfully paint you as the villain, the unstable, controlling mother-in-law who overreacted and cut them off, then Mark would have nowhere else to turn. He would be completely isolated with her. She would become the sole emotional pillar in his life. He would finally be hers completely and totally. She was going to play the victim to him, to your whole family, to everyone on Facebook. The poor, misunderstood wife being bullied by her monster-in-law. It was diabolical. A strategy of emotional warfare. And the house? I asked, a cold dread creeping up my spine. What was her plan for the house? Brenda let out a short, bitter laugh. Oh, that was the masterstroke. Her ace in the hole. She never ever believed you would actually sell it. I remember her swirling her wine glass and saying, "Old ladies like her are all bark and no bite. She'll get angry, she'll huff and puff, but she would never in a million years make her own precious grandchildren homeless. It's the perfect play. In the end she'll back down, we'll get a tearful apology out of her. And Mark will finally learn that his loyalty belongs to me. She was going to use your love for your grandchildren as a weapon against you." The phone felt slick in my hand. My blood ran cold. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The calculated cruelty of her words. The public shaming on social media. The lies she fed to Leo. It wasn't an emotional outburst from a stressed young mother. It was a cold, cruel, and meticulously planned covert operation. She hadn't just stumbled into a fight. She had declared war, armed with a psychological battle plan designed to isolate me, demonize me, and ultimately, break me into submission. And my son, my loving, trusting son, hadn't just been a bystander. He had been the primary objective, the territory to be conquered. And he had surrendered without a single shot being fired. That evening, after the children were tucked into bed, I asked Mark to join me at the dining room table. The scene was eerily similar to our last formal confrontation, but the atmosphere was entirely different. The air was thick not with anger, but with a somber, fragile tension. I looked at my son, this broken man trying so hard to piece his life back together, and my heart ached for him. But I knew that true healing required the harsh antiseptic of the truth. I could not shield him from this. He had to know the full scope of the web he had been caught in. "Mark," I began, my voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. "I need to tell you something. And it's not going to be easy to hear." Slowly, carefully, I recounted my entire conversation with Brenda. I didn't embellish or editorialize. I just laid out the cold, hard facts of Jessica's calculated deception. I watched his face as I spoke, a study in slowly dawning horror. I saw the initial confusion give way to disbelief, then to a sickened comprehension, and finally to a silent, white-hot rage that seemed to burn behind his eyes. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and almost ill. When I finished, he didn't speak for a long time. He just stared at the intricate wood grain of the table, his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles were white. "She planned it," he finally said, his voice a raw, choked whisper. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of terrible fact. All of it. The fight, the things she said about you, it was all a script. A game. Yes, I confirmed softly, the single word landing with heavy finality. It was a game. And you and I were the pieces on her board. He looked up at me. His eyes filled with a pain so deep it was almost bottomless. It was the pain of a man realizing his entire marriage had been a lie, that the woman he loved had seen him not as a partner, but as a prize to be won, a project to be managed. How could I have been so blind? He whispered, more to himself than to me. For years, how could I not have seen what she truly was? Because you loved her, I said simply, without judgment. And because it's very hard to see the monster when it's sleeping in your bed every night, telling you it loves you. He was quiet for a long time after that. I could practically see the last decade of his life replaying in his mind, every argument, every time he'd felt confused or guilty, every time he'd apologized for something he wasn't sure he'd done wrong, all of it now cast in a horrifying new light. This final ugly revelation, as painful as it was, seemed to solidify something in him. This was no longer just about him failing me. This was about him failing himself, about allowing his life to be hijacked by a manipulator. Finally, he met my gaze, a new hard resolve in his eyes. What do I do now, Mom? He asked, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. How do I ever fix this? This was the moment, the critical juncture. The old me, the pre-ambush me, would have opened my arms, said, "It's okay, we'll get through this together," and started fixing things for him. But that me was gone. First, I said, leaning forward, my voice firm but not unkind, you need to understand that this isn't fixed with a single apology or a grand gesture. The trust between us isn't just cracked, Mark. It was pulverized. It has to be rebuilt from dust, and that takes time and effort. Your effort. I know. I'll do anything, he said immediately, earnestly. It's not about doing anything, I corrected him gently. It's about being different. It's about becoming a man who is incapable of letting that happen again. I need to see with my own eyes that you've changed. That this newfound clarity isn't just a reaction to being abandoned and scared. I need to know it's real and permanent. I took a breath and laid out my new terms, the boundaries that were no longer negotiable. We are going to start over, I said. But this new relationship will be on my terms. This house is your home for now, and the children are always welcome. But our dynamic has to change fundamentally. I am your mother. I am not your financial advisor. I am not your emergency fund. And I am not your emotional punching bag or your marriage counselor. You will need to learn to stand entirely on your own 2 feet. I pushed a piece of paper across the table. It had the name and number of a therapist Carol had recommended. You will go to counseling, Mark. Not for me, but for you. You need to talk to a professional to understand why you were susceptible to this, why you couldn't see it, so you can build the strength to never let another person manipulate you like that again. I laid out other rules. You will not speak ill of Jessica in front of the children. She is their mother, and they deserve to be protected from this ugliness. And you will not use me as a crutch. You will handle your own budget, your own job search for something better, your own future. I will be here as your mother, to love you and support you emotionally. But the days of me fixing your problems are over. I could see him absorbing it all, the hard truths landing one by one. It was a lot to take, a complete rewriting of the rules of our lifelong relationship. But he didn't argue. He didn't push back. He just nodded slowly, his eyes clear and focused. Setting such firm boundaries with your own child feels like a violation of nature. Every instinct in your body screams to soothe, to fix, to make it all better. But I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that if I caved now, if I let him off the hook easily, we would be doomed to repeat this toxic cycle forever. This wasn't a punishment, it was a prescription. It was the only medicine that could heal this deep wound. Okay, Mom, he said finally, his voice firm and clear. Okay. I understand. Whatever it takes. He finally understood that forgiveness wasn't a magical reset button he could press. It was the beginning of a long, hard road to rebuilding the man he was supposed to be. The months that followed were a quiet, arduous period of reconstruction. It was like watching a building being painstakingly rebuilt after a demolition. Mark kept his word. He started therapy, and while he never discussed the specifics, I could see the subtle changes in him. A new thoughtfulness, a quiet confidence that wasn't there before. He threw himself into creating a new life for himself and the children. He sold the flashy luxury car they couldn't afford and bought a sensible, reliable used Honda. He picked up extra projects at his law firm, working grueling hours, often leaving before the kids were awake and coming home long after I'd tucked them into bed. He was perpetually exhausted, but beneath the fatigue, I saw a new light in his eyes, the hard-earned, undeniable glow of self-reliance. He was providing, on his own, and it was changing him from the inside out. He brought Leo and Mia over every weekend without fail. Our time together settled into a new, comfortable rhythm. It was simpler than before, stripped of all the transactional complexities. We baked cookies, our hands dusted with flour. We worked in my garden, pulling weeds in a companionable silence. We went to the park, and I'd push Mia on the swing while Mark threw a baseball with Leo. He never once asked for money or even hinted at his financial struggles, though I knew from the worn look of his shoes and the simple meals he packed for the kids that it was tight. He would just thank me sincerely for watching them so he could pick up an extra shift or catch up on paperwork. He was showing me, not just telling me, that he had changed. I added a small scene before Jessica's return that shows Mark's new character. One rainy Saturday, the sink in my kitchen backed up completely, spewing grimy water all over the floor. The old Mark would have panicked and immediately called a plumber, probably asking me to cover the emergency bill. The new Mark simply rolled up his sleeves, found my old toolbox, and spent 3 hours watching YouTube tutorials on his phone. He was soaked and covered in grime, but he fixed it. He stood up, wiped his hands on a rag, and gave me a tired but proud grin. "See, Mom? Getting the hang of this whole adulting thing," he joked. It was a small victory, but it was a profound symbol of his transformation. The house in Georgetown sold quickly in the hot Austin market. The day of the closing was strange. I felt a pang of sadness for the dream that had died within those walls, but it was overwhelmingly overshadowed by a profound sense of relief and liberation. I was in control of my own future again. And then, as I always knew she would, just when things were starting to feel stable, Jessica returned. Mark told me about it a few days later. He came over after the kids were asleep, a grim, tired look on his face. He sat down at the kitchen table, in the very spot where he had broken down weeks before. "She showed up at the apartment," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Just appeared at the door last night. Like no time had passed at all." He described the scene with a detached clarity that told me his therapist was earning her fee. Jessica had appeared looking like a movie star, dressed in a stunning new outfit, her hair and makeup perfect. She was armed with expensive-looking presents for the children and a bottle of his favorite, pricey bourbon. She launched into a polished, well-rehearsed performance, complete with glistening tears, about how she had made a terrible mistake. She spoke of the pressure she was under, how she had lost her way, and how the time apart had made her realize he was the only man she had ever truly loved. She wanted a reconciliation, Mark said, a faint, humorless smile touching his lips. She had it all figured out. She was ready to move back in. As soon as we find a more suitable place, of course. She wanted to be a family again. I held my breath, my hands gripping my coffee mug. This was it. The final exam. All the therapy, all the hard work, all the painful self-reflection, it all led to this moment. I let her finish her entire speech, he said, his gaze steady. I didn't interrupt. When she was done, I looked at her and I asked her one simple question. What about my mother? According to Mark, Jessica's perfect, tear-stained smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. But she recovered instantly, transitioning smoothly into her next tactic. She spoke about how families have disagreements, how passionate people can say regrettable things, and how she was a big enough person to let bygones be bygones, for the sake of the marriage and the children. She suggested we could all have a healing dinner together, Mark continued, his voice laced with a newfound irony. A chance to clear the air. But then she added her non-negotiable condition. As long as your mother understands her new place, she'd said. She needs to respect our privacy and our marriage, Mark. She needs to learn to be a grandmother, not a third parent. We need firm boundaries. Mark took a long sip of his coffee. He looked up and met my eyes across the table, and in his gaze I saw the strength I had always hoped was there. "I stood up, Mom," he said, his voice quiet but as solid as bedrock. "And I told her, my mother is not the one who needs to learn about boundaries, Jessica. You are." I told her that my mom is a foundational, non-negotiable part of my life and my children's lives. I told her that if she could not treat you with the fundamental respect that every human being deserves, let alone the mother of her husband, then there was no us to discuss. I told her that a custody battle and a divorce were preferable to a lifetime of me having to police the way she speaks to you. He said she had been stunned into silence for a moment, utterly unprepared for this new resolute version of him. Then she had cycled through her entire arsenal of manipulation. The tears, the seduction, the accusations, the threats. She had screamed that he was choosing me over her. And he looked her right in the eye and said, "No, Jessica. I'm choosing respect over disrespect. I'm choosing honesty over manipulation. I'm choosing a healthy future for my kids over a toxic present. And if that means I'm choosing my mom, then yes, I am. I will not make the mistake of failing her again." Her mask had finally dropped. When she saw that her control over him was well and truly gone, her face had twisted into an ugly sneer. She had thrown a few more venomous insults at him, called him a fool who would die alone, and stormed out of his life for good. He sat there in my kitchen, looking exhausted but profoundly peaceful. He had faced his demon, the beautiful manipulative ghost of his past, and he had not backed down. He had finally learned to protect his family, and this time he understood deep in his bones that I was and always would be a part of it. He had passed the test. He had finally truly come home. That stormy exit was the last any of us ever saw of Jessica. The divorce papers, filed by a high-powered law firm, arrived a few weeks later. The initial demands were outrageous, but when it became clear Mark had nothing left for her to take, and that I had no intention of funding her settlement, her interest waned. He didn't fight her on anything. He just wanted a clean break. In the end, he was awarded full physical custody of the children. Apparently, Jessica was already deeply involved with a wealthy, older man and wasn't interested in the day-to-day inconveniences of motherhood that might disrupt her new lavish lifestyle. Life after the storm found a new quiet rhythm. The sense of peace that settled over our lives was palpable. With the proceeds from the sale of the house, my own future was secure again. The very first thing I did was march back into Mr. Davis's office. Together we structured an ironclad, irrevocable trust fund for Leo and Mia's college education. It was their grandfather Robert's legacy, and I made sure it was protected from any future turmoil, accessible only for tuition and educational expenses, with me as the sole trustee. The rest of the money I invested wisely, a quiet promise to myself that I would never again place my security in anyone's hands but my own. Freed from the constant corrosive drip of Jessica's criticism and manipulation, Mark began to thrive. It was like watching a plant that had been living in a dark room finally being moved into the sunlight. He excelled at work, no longer distracted and emotionally drained. He earned a significant promotion and then, a year later, another one. He moved his little family out of the cramped apartment and into a modest but clean 3-bedroom townhouse in a good school district, a place he could comfortably afford on his own salary. It wasn't as grand or as showy as the house in Georgetown, but it was infinitely more of a home. It was a place built on his own hard work and resilience, filled with the sounds of homework and laughter, not simmering tension and unspoken resentments. Our new relationship, forged in the fires of betrayal, is stronger than the old one ever was. It's built on a foundation of brutal honesty and clearly defined, respected boundaries. I am his mother, his confidant, his biggest cheerleader. But I am not his safety net. He is my son, a man I am now profoundly proud of. I am the children's grandmother, a cherished, integral part of their lives, not an on-call ATM or a free babysitting service. He calls me to share a funny story about Mia or to ask for my advice on a recipe, not to solve a crisis or ask for a loan. We are closer now in our separate homes than we ever were when we were all pretending to be a happy family under one big expensive roof. One Sunday afternoon, a little over a year after Jessica had left, I was in my garden, my hands deep in the rich soil. Mark was there with the kids. He was patiently showing Leo how to stake up the tomato plants, the same way Robert had once taught him. Mia was helping me by watering my feet with her little pink watering can. The sun was warm on my back, and the air was filled with their happy chatter. Mark looked over at me and smiled, a genuine untroubled smile that reached his eyes. "Thanks, Mom," he said quietly. "For what?" I asked. "For everything," he said, his gaze sweeping over the scene. The kids, the garden, the peaceful afternoon. For not giving up on me even when I deserved it. And for forcing me to grow up. In that moment, all the pain, all the anger, all the sleepless nights of the past year seemed to fade away, replaced by a quiet, profound sense of gratitude. The wound was still there. A scar on my heart that would likely never disappear completely. But it no longer ached. It was just a reminder of a battle fought and won. Was the path I took easy? No. It was the hardest, most painful thing I have ever done. It felt like a betrayal of my own maternal instincts, like tearing a part of my own body away to save the rest. But was it worth it? Absolutely. Because I look at my son now, and I see a good man. A strong, capable, and kind man. A man who is teaching his own son what integrity and loyalty look like, and teaching his daughter what she should expect from the men in her life. And I look at myself in the mirror, and I see a woman who found her own strength in the ashes of her deepest heartbreak. I am loved not for what I can give, but for the woman I am. Sometimes to be loved the way you truly deserve, you first have to teach people how to treat you. You have to be willing to burn it all down to show them where your boundaries are drawn. I learned my own value the hard way. And I will never again settle for anything less than the respect I am owed. Never again. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I feel it's important to speak these truths out loud. If you've ever had to draw a difficult, painful line in the sand with your own family, I would be honored to hear your story in the comments below. Please know, you are not alone in your struggle. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. You never know whose life you might touch by sharing your own.